begin, we'll continue to invite people from the waiting room as we begin the conversation this evening. But it comes to me to welcome you all to this conversation with Ilan Pappé and Mustafa Barghouti. We're very honored and quite excited to have both speakers with us this evening. Just for a little bit of background, in January 2021, the European Center for Palestine Studies, the Exeter Decolonizing Network, and the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies came together in collaboration, wanting to create a space for diagnosis, for discussion and dialogue, and for radical change, beginning with the question of Palestine. That's what's bringing us all here today together. So our conversation started in January and it carried us through June, and then we took a term off and now we're back again. And it's been amazing. It's interrogated some of the powerful structures and discourses that maintain political violence, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and neoliberal capitalism. And then at the same time, the speakers have reflected on movements for decolonization, anti-racism, and abolition, and how these are rooted in forms of transnational solidarity with long and complex histories. So tonight we're super excited to pick up where we left off by welcoming Dr. Mustafa Barghouti and Professor Ilan Pappé for a conversation about liberation and the left. So tonight we're quite eager to learn from them about the failures and struggles and futures, and to think and to talk about the limits and possibilities of politics here with our amazing global audience. My name is Katie Natanel. I'm a lecturer in gender studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies. I'm also a member of the European Center for Palestine Studies and a member of the Exeter Decolonizing Network. And I'm joined with my amazing co-chair, who I will invite to introduce himself.
Thank you, Katie. It's great to see so many people wanting to engage with these important conversations. And it's an honor to be here. My name is Francesco Muruso. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Exeter's Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies. And I'm also a member of the European Center for Palestine Studies. Over to you, Katie.
Great. So we'll thank some of the amazing team who has made this event possible before we move on to telling you about some of our guidelines for conduct and then the conversation itself. So thank you goes to the sponsors of this event tonight, the European Center for Palestine Studies, the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies here at the University of Exeter, and of course the Exeter Decolonizing Network. There is a small and powerful team behind this event and every event in the series. Tonight, we'd like to thank Asha Ali, Andrea Wallace, Riyad Gamour, Malcolm Richards, Sarah Wood, Sarah Roberts, Nadia Khalaf, Sajad Rizvi, and Gareth Stansfield, who have all put time and energy and love into the event tonight and then the series as a whole. Also, we'd like to thank our global audience who's joining us here on Zoom, but also via YouTube and on Twitter. Welcome to everyone once again. And of course, thank you goes to Francesco, my co-chair, and Dr. Barghouti and Professor Pappé. What you can expect tonight in just a few minutes will be a conversation between Dr. Barghouti and Professor Pappé that will last for 45 minutes, after which we'll have a period of question and answer. These will be submitted in the way that Francesco will tell you about in just a minute, but we'll have Q&A for about 30 minutes, which is moderated by ourselves, and then we'll draw to a close at 7:30. Francesco, to you.
So just very quickly, some housekeeping rules and information about how to participate to the Q&A. So for those of you joining us on Zoom, please remember to keep your microphones muted during the event. You are welcome to keep your cameras on or off as you wish. Comments and questions are invited through the chat functions on Zoom and on YouTube. And for those on Twitter, through the hashtag Barghouti Pappé 2022. These will be collated and moderated by Katie and myself. Please communicate with kindness and with respect as you would at an in-person event. This continues to be a difficult time marked by anxiety and loss, and so how we speak matters even more. Please note that the event is being recorded. You're welcome to change your name if you wish to remain anonymous. During the Q&A, we will be using the screen names to identify the speakers and those who asked questions. Thank you.
Perfect. So now a couple of introductions and then off we go to the conversation. It falls to me to introduce Professor Ilan Pappé, which is always a pleasure. Professor Ilan Pappé is a professor of history and the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies here at the University of Exeter. As it says in the bio that was listed on Eventbrite, he is an expatriate Israeli historian and socialist activist. His research contextualizes the history of Palestine into a larger global context of settler colonialism and challenges the dominant Israeli narrative. Ilan, as most of us know, has been part of countless campaigns and actions, and most recently became a founding member of the new movement, the One Democratic State Initiative. Ilan is also a friend and mentor to many of us here, and I'm the person who verifies all of the identities of people registered for the event, and I'm in touch with people via email if we need to ask some questions. So actually over the past few days, I've received messages and communicated with people who are attending tonight who spoke of their different connections to Ilan. And it's not an exaggeration to say that he has touched countless lives through his incisive critiques and through his will to action, as much as through his courage and his kindness. And having worked with Ilan for a number of years now, I can see clearly how he builds community, how he invites people in, how he guides, how he nourishes, and how he inspires. And I've also seen how he generously rethinks and revisits, how he's constantly moving forward in his ideas and in his actions in the interest of something that's much bigger than himself. And it's in this direction that we are going to travel together today. So Ilan is the author of the best-selling The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, A History of Modern Palestine, The Israel-Palestine Question, The Forgotten Palestinians, and The Idea of Israel. And he's written 2 books with Noam Chomsky, The War on Gaza and on Palestine. And his 2016 book, The Biggest Prison on Earth, A History of the Occupied Territories, received the Palestine Book Award, which is indeed a prestigious honor. So Ilan, it is always a pleasure and an honor to learn from you. Francesco?
It is a great honor to introduce our guest for this evening, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Mustafa Barghouti is a prominent politician, campaigner, and physician with a long history of organizing and advocacy in Palestine. He is the leader of the Palestinian National Initiative and ran as a presidential candidate in 2005, coming in second to Mahmoud Abbas. In 2006, he's been elected as a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council, and he served as Minister of Information in the 2007 National Unity Government. In 2010, Dr. Barghouti was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his social, political, human rights, and peace activism. He is one of the most active grassroots leaders in Palestine, campaigning for the development of Palestinian civil society and democracy, and advocating for internal reform of Palestinian political and institutional structures. Dr. Barghouti is an international spokesperson for the Palestinian cause, a leading figure in the popular resistance against Israeli occupation and apartheid on the ground, and a coordinator of the International Solidarity Presence in Palestine. He is the founder and president of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, and writes extensively for local and international audiences on Palestinian politics, focusing on civil society, democracy, and health development policy. He's also the author of a critical assessment of Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century. The book, titled The Ploy of the Century, Dimensions and Confrontational Strategies, was published by the Center for Arab Unity Studies in 2020. There, he argues that the changes in US foreign policy are an attempt to liquidate the Palestinian cause, calling for the adoption of a new approach by the main Palestinian political factions. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Over to you, Ilan. Ilan, you're muted. Sorry.
This is what happens when you start inviting old people to something of the 21st century. Anyway, thank you everyone for organizing it and being behind the logistics and all the preparation. And I will not waste any more time on this, and I will go directly to our conversation. Thank you, dear Mustafa, for being with us. It's such a great pleasure. I have several questions, and I hope we can develop it into a conversation in the time allocated for this part of the event. Let us start, dear Mustafa, with some historical questions, which are relevant to the present, I believe. Your personal biography and that of the Arab left in many ways are intertwined and lead me to think about your present political house or the recent political house, the Palestinian National Initiative, and overall the situation of the Palestinian left in our times. You grew up surrounded by internationalist ideas in a family committed to struggle against national and social injustices, which explains why in a certain moment in your life, you were also a member of Hizb al-Sha'ab, the Palestinian People's Party, the ex-communist party of Palestine, as I was for my sins in its parallel sister party inside Israel. In our institute, we have colleagues from all over the world. We have revisited the failures and achievements of the Arab left in the past and wondered about the possible role the left, and in particularly the Arab and Palestinian left, can play in our times in struggles such as the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. So I would like to ask if there is still a left, and does it have a role in the liberation struggle? And if I might just add, where do you see initiatives like the Palestinian National Initiative, which you have established together with the late Edward Said, the late Haidar Abdel Shafi, and others, in such a combination? Does it create a new language for the left? Does it create a new kind of activism which is different from the way organizations like this behaved in the past? And does it have a special role to play, since we know how much the Israeli settler colonialism is intertwined with neoliberalism, against which you kept warning us, especially when you wrote about the way recently neo-capitalist states deal with the questions of refugees and immigrants in this century. So I would love to kind of have your take on this particular side of Palestinian politics in the past and in the present, which I call the left in a very liberal defined way, but I think many of our viewers are dealing with this question for quite a few years now. You have to unmute, Mustafa.
Thank you so much, Ilan, and it's an honor to be with you in this, and I thank the team and of the university for this opportunity and for preparing this discussion. Let me start by talking about the failure. First of all, is there a role for the left? Of course, I mean, there is no doubt about that. Can there be a future role? Absolutely. That's the short answer. But the question about the failure, I think, has to be addressed from three different angles. And I would say the global context is one angle, the regional context is another, and then the Palestinian internal context. I would like to touch on the three of them. Globally speaking, we know that there has been huge success of capitalism and actually new formations. One can say that maybe capitalism has metamorphosed into new forms, including neoliberalism and what I call actually global colonialism. And by that, I mean that class division is happening now, not only at the level of each country, but at the global level itself. I mean, to the extent that you can say that there are exploiting countries and exploited countries, and that is a very important change that has taken place, and it has definitely affected the ability of many left movements to be effective, including in Palestine and the Arab world. The second context, which is very important now in the Arab region, is the regional one. We know that there are counter-democratic and counter-revolutionary forces that are against liberation and against democratization of the region. And I would say that these are movements, these are countries, and on top of them is Israel. And in my opinion, the Zionist establishment is doing everything it can to prevent Arab countries from transforming into a democratic system. And they are definitely against democratization of the Palestinian structure. And add to that the reactionary Arab regimes. And probably one has to remind people of the effect of the so-called petrodollar and its funding of counter-revolutions. And that definitely has affected the possibility of democratic and left transformations in the region. But at the same time, one has to see, as you say in your question, that the failures probably are creating new opportunities, creating new spaces. But the failure here is not related to the left only, it is also related to the failure of those reactionary groups that took over and defeated certain democratic revolutions. They have also failed in solving the problems, the economic problems, the social problems. And that, in my opinion, the combination is creating very huge space for change, globally and locally. We see interesting developments in a place like Chile. We see the rise of the Black Lives Matter in the United States. We see very serious movement against this horrible regime in Brazil. And here in the Arab world, I encourage everybody to keep following what's happening today in Tunisia and in Sudan, which sounds like the renovation of the Arab democratic revolutions. And I think the left there is also already playing a very important role. So what is different about Palestinian National Initiative, I hope, and about many other new movements, that they are more flexible, less dogmatic, much less dogmatic than the previous original forms of the left. And that gives them the ability, in my opinion, to be more effective. But when we talk about Palestinian context, and that's the third aspect, one has to look at certain factors which has affected certain classical left parties in Palestine and weakened them and marginalized them, actually, to a large extent. And I would say that there were three factors here. The first factor is that some of these parties were too dependent on the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they were dramatically affected. The second factor was, in my opinion, the lack of understanding in some of these parties to understand the lack of understanding of the value and importance of the issue of democracy and internal democracy, but also the inability to deal with the national question. Sometimes mistakes were made, and that weakened, of course, the left parties. Also, there was a great impact of the inability to deal with religious societies and how you approach religion in this context. I think these were all factors that has affected and related to weakening some of these groups. But the most important one in the Palestinian context for me today, and maybe this is what distinguishes the Palestinian Initiative from some other left parties, is that some of them, they were unable to be independent in their vision, independent in their program, and independent in their practice. They were too much attached to, and some of them are, in my opinion, are too much attached to one of the main two main streams here, Fatah and Hamas, in the Palestinian society. And I believe, that's what we believe in the Palestinian National Initiative, that you cannot really be effective unless you create an independent program and independent vision and an independent practice from these two parties. And in doing so, one can really try to represent what I call the silent majority in the Palestinian society. That's what we saw, for instance, during the presidential elections in 2005. There's a huge power that is waiting and looking for an alternative, and that wants to see that. Sometimes I think that some left parties have only the name of the left, and they are unable to create that space of independence, which makes them vulnerable really to being controlled by right-wing parties, conservative parties. And the question of alliances here, with whom do they ally in elections, for instance, is a very interesting and indicative one. Is the Mubadara different from that? I believe so. It's trying to be different. And here the name is not as important as the substance is. And you can call it a democratic left tendency or independent one. But the most important distinguishing, I would say, characteristics are, first of all, as I said, the independence from the two major streams in the Palestinian society. Second, that the initiative is very much in opposition to the system of nepotism and clientelism, which is unfortunately dominating in sometimes in the political life. Third, that it is concentrating not only on the issue of national struggle and the liberation from Israeli occupation and the system of apartheid, but also it concentrates a lot on social justice issues, the workers' rights, the poor people's rights, the marginalized groups, and it is totally uncompromising when it comes to women's rights. That is, in my opinion, very distinguished, and it also relates very much to youth, and that's why 85% maybe of its membership are young women, young people and women. That is different from other groups. But one of the two most important final things I want to say here is the issue of democracy. No compromise about the issue of freedom of speech, about the separation of powers, about fighting authoritarianism internally in Palestine. And the activism here is very much related to struggling for internal freedom as well. Finally, I would say that maybe this movement has had three avant-garde positions or activities that made it different. One is its involvement, actual involvement, practical involvement in popular resistance. Second, in boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, BDS. Third, in the fact that we are, the emphasis that we are not fighting only to end occupation, but to end the system of apartheid and discrimination in historic Palestine.
Thank you for this, Mustafa. If I may venture and talk about the political Palestinian reality in a wider context, not just in the occupied territories, and talk about maybe the Palestinian national movement in a wider context. Like so many of us, I know that you were impressed, as I was, by the 11 days of resistance we witnessed all over historical Palestine in May 2021. The question is, can this unity on the ground be a factor encouraging unity from above, so to speak? Quite a few activists suggested even before those events that there is a need for fundamental change in the liberation movement as a whole. Some suggested either to restructure the PLO or make it more representative body, or even create altogether a new outfit that represents not only the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but maybe the Palestinian society wherever it exists, and integrate the various Palestinian movements and orientate the struggle in the future. So I would like to ask, what is your response to such initiatives? Do you think they are relevant, they are important, they are vital, or is it not the time now to consider such initiatives and leave more or less the political structures as they are?
What happened in May was really a turning point. And in the sense of the unity between Palestinians, not only in the occupied territories, but between Palestinians in the occupied territories and those who live in Israel itself and those who live in the diaspora. It was a really unifying moment. And I always say that the struggle against oppression is unifying us, while the struggle for authority is dividing us. And unfortunately, the struggle for authority in Palestine is happening about an authority that is totally under Israeli military occupation. What happened in May, in my opinion, had an impact and will continue to have an impact. But but I have to say that this unity on the ground, at the grassroots level, has not yet reflected at the level of the above, as you call it. We see an objective need, an objective reality that requires the unity between Palestinians. But at the same time, we see a different line being followed. In reality, what we see is that Oslo process and Oslo agreement has divided the Palestinians, divided them into those who are in the occupied territories, those who are in 1948 areas, and those who are in the diaspora who felt sort of left out. And the system of apartheid that Israel has created, occupation transformed into apartheid, or actually ethnic cleansing and occupation has transformed into an apartheid, which was very well described, as you know, in the Human Rights Watch report and the B'Tselem report, and previously the ESQA report, which was never adopted by the United Nations. All these reports have shown that the system of oppression is unifying Palestinians because it is affecting the three parts at the same time. And in my opinion, and the opinion of the Palestinian Initiative, the central goal of the Palestinian liberation movement has to change. It cannot continue to say that our goal is to end occupation only. It has to say that our goal is to end occupation and to bring down the system of oppressive, racist apartheid in all of Palestine. And here I don't see a difference between what's happening today in the Negev, in terms of the uprising there, and what's happening among the Palestinians in Lud, or that is what is happening in Burqa in the West Bank, or Beta, or Jerusalem, or Hebron. It's the same struggle against the same enemy and the same form of oppression. And that's why I think we today need a new form of unity. I don't know what this form would take, but I know that there is an objective need for a system that would unify the struggle of Palestinians in all these areas. And to achieve that, I believe there are 4 preconditions that are required very quickly. The first one is that the Palestinian leadership has to adopt an alternative program of struggle, an alternative to Oslo approach, an alternative to this myth of the possibility of compromise that is not happening. Second, there has to be an acceptance of the idea of participatory democracy, a unity that is based on democratic participation of people. Third, the right of the Palestinians to elect their representatives. We've been denied this right. We haven't had any elections since 2006. And the people have the right to choose their leaders, specifically for the Palestinian National Council, which is the parliament or the governing body of the PLO. And we need to find forms to unify the struggle of Palestinians in a more effective way. About the PLO, I totally agree and I totally support the need for restructuring, democratic restructuring of the PLO, because that's the only way to bring back its role. It's a very vital role. Today, I must say that PLO is co-opted. It is co-opted by the Palestinian Authority. It is crippled. It has lost the ability to be influential as it used to be. And that is a big challenge that is facing the Palestinians. But at the same time, one has to say that what we need to do has to balance between two things. A true democratic representation of the Palestinian people in their leadership structure, but at the same time sustaining and keeping the right of the Palestinians to represent themselves. That's why PLO is important, because it is recognized as a representative of the Palestinian people internationally and at the level of the Arab world. And we all know that one of the goals of the deal of the century of Mr. Trump, which is, by the way, a deal that was written by Netanyahu, in my opinion, not by Trump. That deal of the century was aiming at eliminating the right of the Palestinian people to represent themselves. And that's what this Israeli government is trying to do. They want to discuss our issues with those countries that are normalizing with Israeli occupation. And that's why, while there is an important goal of sustaining our right to represent ourselves by sustaining the role of the PLO itself has to change and has to be democratically restructured. There are many new initiatives in Palestine. We are the only movement that joined the PLO since was allowed into the PLO or managed to enter the PLO after waiting for 10 years, since 1982 maybe. So there are lots of new movements in Palestine or new initiatives, and I think these people should be given the chance to be represented through democratic elections.
Yes, let's indeed move a little bit to the international arena, because even if we know efforts for unity and more democratic representations are being successful, a lot of what goes on in Palestine and will occur in Palestine depends on also the international community. In her excellent book, History of False Hope, Laurie Allen describes various junctures in which the international community pretended to investigate the violations of the Palestinian rights without any real intention and willingness to confront Israel and its exceptional immunity in the international community. She mentions the term democratic listeners for those of us who think that the problem was only Trump, and as you know and I know, all the American administration before Trump, in fact, followed a very similar line. The term democratic listener, in her eyes, is the futile act of sympathy with the Palestinians by people such as the former President Barack Obama. And I think this would be unfortunately true about Joe Biden as well, and the Democratic Party, and anybody who kind of pins their hope on the Democratic administration today in the United States. And I thought of something you commented on when Barack Obama came to the occupied territories and stated that he came to listen. And you reacted by saying, I have the quote here, "We Palestinians have been listening for too long. This passivity on Obama's part is unacceptable and dangerous," end of quote. This leads me to the question of Israel's exceptionalism. Have we become better, do you think, in dealing with Israel's exceptional immunity from international intervention and rebuke? And is this something you think that academic communities, like the community we have in Exeter, can contribute more in this regard? Because this exceptionalism is the shield of immunity that does not allow governments in the West in particular, but even beyond the West, to take any proactive action in support and solidarity with the Palestinians.
The short answer to your question is not yet. Not yet. We haven't yet become better. Before I make details about that or explain something about that, I would like to remind everybody that with what you said, Ilan, very well, is that really what we need is a new understanding of the relationship between settler colonialism and the system of apartheid, its relationship with the global new capitalism. And I think academics have the duty of trying to explain why all the right-wingers and the extreme fascists and the reactionary people in so many different countries support the Israeli policy. I mean, what kind of connection is there? I mean, why Bolsonaro is such a supporter of Israel? Why Trump was such a supporter of this Israeli government and its policies? Why the racists in Hungary and Austria are doing the same? Why Israel is creating alliances and even security and military alliances with the most reactionary Arab regimes? I mean, what's happening here? And I think it is very clear that there is a real connection here between settler colonialism, which sees itself as an extension of other settler colonialism in so many other places. And I believe, that's why I believe that the entry point today to explain the Palestinian problem and to build on solidarity with Palestine should be the criticism of apartheid and the explanation of what apartheid means in Palestine and why it is a much worse system, a much worse system than apartheid that prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. And when we speak about that, we have to see what are the challenges that are facing us, why we cannot yet overcome this system of impunity that Israel is enjoying. I think there are several factors there, several challenges. One of them is the fact that Israel continues to use and abuse the relationship of the Holocaust and with Israel, and that is very well known to everybody. Second, I think Israel is also using the fact that it is itself, as I've just tried to describe, Israel itself is a base for global colonialism today. And that's why it has a role that it plays about the Gulf and about some other countries in the region and about strategic balance in the Middle East. Third, I think we are facing one of the most developed and the most organized lobbies in the world. Very strong lobby machine, and one has to face that challenge. And finally, I think it is important to emphasize that Israel is using what I call intellectual terrorism or mental terrorism, I don't know what is the best way of explaining it, Ilan. But this strategy of frightening people. Anybody who struggles against Israeli occupation is described as terrorist. If you use the most non-violent form of resistance, you are called a violent person. If you just resist occupation by talking against it, we are described as provocators. And if you are supporting Palestinians, they describe you as anti-Semitic. And people like you, Ilan, will be described as self-hating Jews. I mean, there is a whole battery of a system that tries to frighten people and prevent them from expressing their opinion. And we have witnessed, if you allow me to say that, we have witnessed recently a very sharp increase in these attacks. First of all, the attack on BDS. You can see it in Britain, you can see it in France, you can see it in the United States. There are even laws against it. Then we have the most dangerous three instruments that are used against solidarity with Palestinians and against Palestinian society. One is NGO Monitor, the other one is UK lawyers, and the third one is UN Watch. These three instruments are now mobilized to attack specifically the Palestinian civil society. And why are they doing that to civil society? to the most developed civil society actually in the Arab world. They're doing it because they try to deprive the Palestinians from the role that civil society organizations are playing in supporting the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. And second, to prevent their role in exposing the human rights violations that Israel is committing. And also to prevent them from playing a very important role as a democratic force, trying to introduce democracy in Palestine. And in that sense, what we witness here is a very dangerous effort to dehumanize Palestinian struggle in general. Of course, there are successes here, and I admire actions by people like Susan Sarandon and Emma Watson, and who broke the wall of fear. The role you play, Ilan, I mean, you've been a hero of that, and I really admire what you have done through your work. The role that Noam Chomsky, Daniel Barenboim, and others have played. We also see a huge change in the Democratic Party in the United States, especially among young people. And I believe that academics have a role to play here. But finally, without talking too much, finally, I think there are two very important conditions here if you want to succeed. The first one is not to be defensive, to take the initiative. If we are defensive, we always lose the fight. And second is to organize. The more we can organize to encounter these lobbies, the more we can be successful in bringing down this impunity that Israel is enjoying.
Thank you. You mentioned, Mustafa, what's going on today in the Nakab, and I don't think many people outside historical Palestine know about it, because I haven't seen any reports on it in the Western media, where the Palestinians of the South have taken action against an insidious Israeli plan to plant European pine trees forests in the desert. For some reason, Israelis feel intimidated by the desert and they want to turn it into a European forest. But of course, the main objective of that forestation project is to try and squeeze the Palestinians in the south into an enclave that would not allow them to develop their economy, the social cohesion, and their national aspiration. And this brings me to the question of decolonization that you've already touched upon, Mustafa, because one of the important networks helping us with this series is the Exeter Decolonizing Network, that indeed, as you pointed out, see the colonization as prevailing in many parts in the world, including in the West. And we had gone quite far in our deliberation on the question of decolonization in our times. And it is clear that decolonization is a relevant process for our century and for all our societies, and particularly for Palestine. And what I really like about your work, Mustafa, is its clarity. You unpack clearly what decolonization means when talking about the liberation of Palestine. And before talking about the end game of this process, namely how should we imagine a decolonized historical Palestine, I would like to go back a little bit to the modes of Palestinian resistance. And some of them you have mentioned, the BDS, the Sumud, but there are also these popular resistance on the ground. We saw it in the Great March in Gaza. We see it now in the Nakab. By the way, they succeeded, at least temporarily, to stop the forestation project. That we were less successful in East Jerusalem against the ethnic cleansing that is taking there. Is there something still missing in this resistance on the ground that people should know and understand is going on? Because the Israelis also like to convey the message of Palestinians' passivity, of acceptance or resignation, and therefore there's no need for any dramatic change in the status quo. But those of us who are on the ground know that the resistance of individuals and of collectives is still going on. But can you see something like a third uprising and third intifada being part of that resistance in the future?
I do see that, yes. I don't know when, and I don't know exactly which form it will take, but I think since 2015, we've been moving in that direction. And specifically, since the people have already are convinced, the people of Palestine are almost 100% convinced, maybe with a little minority of 1%, they are totally convinced that Oslo path has failed, that the authority has failed, that this reliance on a compromise with Israel is not working, and the people are seeking ways to struggle back. And I believe that much of the new forms are also have been used before, and I'll explain more. But this popular resistance, sometimes we call it popular nonviolent resistance, this popular resistance is the new form of struggle in Palestine. It does not negate the right of the Palestinians to use all other forms of resistance as long as they respect international law. And frequently, Palestinians are in Gaza, for instance, using military struggle to defend themselves, to deter the Israeli aggression. That is well known. But the most popular form, the most used form, the most effective form is what we have been advocating, which is popular resistance. And I want to tell you that in that case, and while we are inventing and using new forms, we are in a dynamic process because the establishment, if I might call it so, is constantly trying to co-opt these new forms, to neutralize them, if you sort of, to make them an official ministry, for instance, and or a governmental body. But it's not working. And but I wanted to say that because I want people to understand that this is a dynamic process, that it's not just a new form you discover and you use. You first struggle on the ground to promote these forms. And I would add to popular resistance also the issue of steadfastness. You know that in the 70s and in the 80s, this was the main goal, which is how to help people steadfast against occupation. This is becoming even more important today. Why? Because it is the main instrument to prevent ethnic cleansing in many areas, especially in Area C, which represents 62% of the West Bank, as you know, where so many communities like Sheikh Jarrah and Khan al-Ahmar and Nagaf itself in the south of Israel or south of historic Palestine is being subjected to efforts of ethnic cleansing. BDS is another very important form. Why it is so important? First of all, because it translates solidarity with Palestinians into a material power, into an economic effect that affects occupation. And also it provides Palestinians who are in the diaspora with an effective form of participating in the struggle of their people, a form of that is effective and that is affecting the Israeli occupation. Finally, I would like to say that popular resistance is not, or when we call it nonviolent resistance, is not a passive resistance, as some people think. On the contrary, it is going to become the most important form of struggle against apartheid. But there is another concept about struggle and forms of struggle that we have introduced and that we try to emphasize very much, which is that our goal in the struggle is to change the balance of power, is to fix the severe disparity in the balance of power between Palestinians and the Israeli establishment. And we speak about 6 pillars of struggle as a strategy that consists of 6 pillars of struggle. Popular resistance, first, BDS, second, steadfastness, third, in integrating the Palestinian struggle between Palestinians in the occupied territories in 1948 areas and in the diaspora, fourth, and fifth, the creation of a unified democratic leadership We need that desperately as a way of achieving national unity. And finally, and that is the sixth pillar that we speak about, is the penetration of the circles of our opponents, and working as much as we can with different groups everywhere to mobilize solidarity with the Palestinian cause.
Thank you. And I think this might be my final question. And I think it sort of summarized very well what we have talked about. You defined your and the PNI's vision for the future as including, among other aspiration, the following one, and I quote, bringing an end to the system of apartheid in all parts, I stress, in all parts of historic Palestine. Does this mean the establishment of a one democratic state? And is such a project plausible in your mind? Or maybe even more generally, since this is my last question, how do you imagine a decolonized Palestine if all the struggles that you were describing would really be successful, and if we will succeed in also galvanizing even more the international community and change the balance of power? Is this something that is part of what you're thinking of, or you're just strategically focusing now on a very near future rather than on a more distant one?
Well, thank you. This is a very good question. I believe that definitely the ending of apartheid, bringing down the system of apartheid in all parts of historic Palestine, as we say, could mean definitely one democratic state, yes. But theoretically, there is no problem with that. Practically, we have to be careful about not engaging at this level, at this time, at this period, into a new division between Palestinians, between those who want a Palestinian state, independent state, as they call it, and those who say, let's have one democratic state. There is already different opinions here. And so while I say that, yes, one democratic state, which was the original Palestinian goal, as you know, would be the right concept for ending apartheid, I would say that the goal that we are identifying in our new program, by the way, which will be published soon, is concentrating on ending the system of apartheid in all of Palestine, including ethnic cleansing, including occupation, but also exercising the right of Palestinians for self-determination. The right of self-determination, which means I am not the one who will decide what is the form that Palestinians will choose, but it's all of us as Palestinians. And let me also say here, it's a very important issue, that logically speaking, of course, one democratic state is the right approach, but we have to also mention that there will never be a one democratic state, and there will never be an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, which has been the slogan for a long time, without bringing down apartheid. And usually, we have to understand that usually we hear the counter arguments from some people who would say Israel will never accept one state solution. And my response to them usually is, does Israel accept a two-state solution anyhow? Of course not. They are not accepting two-state solution. They are not accepting one-state solution. We have to understand the reality that we live in today. The reality we live in today, and that's what I wish every diplomat in this world would understand, especially diplomats in Europe, is that we live in one state, but with a system of apartheid. We already live in one apartheid state. That is the reality of today. And that is why bringing down this apartheid is the most important issue. One apartheid state with a process of gradual, continuous annexation of the West Bank piece by piece. We want to bring down apartheid And I don't care if this Israeli establishment accepts that or does not accept that. Actually, I would ask the question, when did liberation movements decide their goal based on what their colonizers would accept? Is that what Algeria did when it struggled for independence? Is that what South Africans did when they struggled against apartheid? Is that what Vietnam did when it struggled for its freedom? No. And in my opinion, and I'm sorry to be so frank here, the sin of the PLO leadership at the time is that it accepted to make its goal a negotiated agreement. A negotiated agreement meant that a negotiated solution meant that the international community gave Israel the right to have the veto over the establishment of an independent Palestinian state and over ending the occupation. Otherwise, why would all these European countries that speak about two-state solution still abstain from recognizing the Palestinian state while they are recognizing Israel? So, saying all of that, I would also alert you and warn against one specific thing here, which is that we have to be very careful with those who say there is no possibility for two-state solution and this is the end of that possibility, without saying what is the alternative. These are people who are practically supporters of this Israeli establishment and who are supporters of status quo, of keeping the system of apartheid. We have to be very, very careful here about those who, we have to differentiate this camp from the camp that you represent or the camp that I represent in struggling against apartheid. And I think it is our duty to explain to our friends that the status quo cannot be maintained. And I listen sometimes to some diplomats who speak, who support two-state solutions, but they keep saying that we have to stabilize the situation. And their goal as diplomats is to stabilize the status quo. My goal is to destabilize the status quo. And it should be our goal to destabilize the status quo and change it, because that's the only way to get to freedom and to decolonize this horrible system.
Yes, definitely. And I think we all agree that the process of decolonization should be led by the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And we are definitely should help building the solidarity network inside Israel, outside of historical Palestine. There's so many other questions I still wanted to ask about the right of return, the delegitimization of the Hamas, your other hat, if you want, about apartheid, medical apartheid that Israel is exercising, but we are running out of time. And I'm sure our very knowledgeable audience would bring up some of these questions anyway. So I'm ending this part by, again, thank you so much, Mustafa, for taking the time and being so attentive. And I think I'm now giving the floor back to Katie, if I'm not mistaken.
You are not. Thank you so much, both of you. What an incredible conversation. We've have so much to think about, and there are quite a few questions coming in here on Zoom, but also on YouTube. And so we'll ask as many as we can, and then send to you both the full transcript of questions, because I know there are going to be points that you want to think about that we can't discuss here today. So I'll ask the first question, which comes to us via Zoom. And let me find it. Here we go. Maxine Kaufman-Lacusta asks, says that they recently read Jeff Halper's book, Arguing for One Democratic State, focusing on the decolonization of Israel-Palestine, ending Israeli domination, achieved under Palestinian leadership, for example, democratize PLO, but with the participation of Israeli allies, colonizers, quote, colonizers who refuse. Can you comment on the feasibility of such a program?
I think there is no, thank you for the question. I think there is no difference between what I said and what Jeff Helper is describing here. I believe that what we speak about is to end this system of oppression. The form of one-state solution is definitely an important alternative. But what maybe I would differ about is that we have to define how to get there and what process we should use to get there. And that's why I emphasize so much the issue of bringing down apartheid. Unfortunately, some of our friends think that when we say this is a system of apartheid, we are forgetting that it is a system of occupation, or ignoring that it's a system of ethnic cleansing that has been used. It's none of that, of course, none of that. It's on the contrary. What I'm saying is that the ethnic cleansing that took place in 1948 and that is happening today in the West Bank in certain parts at a different pace, and the oppressive occupation is all crystallized now into racism. And apartheid is racism par excellence. And actually, when you look at the Zionist movement and its origin and how it started, it's all about racism. It's about racist ideology. And that's why I think that dismantling the system and mobilizing the utmost possible support internationally to Palestinian cause goes through explaining that we have to bring down the system of apartheid. I will not fight with a Palestinian now who wants an independent state in the West Bank and Gaza. I will say, let's fight together, let's struggle together to bring down apartheid, because without bringing it, nothing will be achieved.
If I may add, Katie, just one sentence. I totally agree with Mustafa, and I understand what Jeff Alper is saying, but I do think that it's far more important in this particular moment for progressive Israeli Jews, let's call them anti-Zionist Jews, people who believe in decolonization, to work on the Jewish society. It's less urgent for them to be part of a new PLO or a new leadership. Maybe this could happen in the future. I think we're in a similar historical phase when in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, the focus on how to work with the white population was done by a different body than the ANC before people joined the ANC. We are, and I'm part of an effort to introduce Israeli Jews to decolonization, what it entails, what does it mean, why is it important? And I think this is our role, and the Palestinians have their own, I think, agenda now in terms of unity, democratization, representation, and so on. But I do believe that in the end of the day, these processes, discrete processes, if you want, will fuse to one process, because at the end of the day, you have millions of Israeli Jews and millions of Palestinians living between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and they will have to find a way of share this land, but under a decolonized space. And the host muted me. Probably I said something I should not have said, so I apologize. Anyway, go on, Katie, go on.
May I just add one thing here? I mean, I see no problem with us Palestinians and Jewish people in general, and Jewish Israelis, of course, being together, working together jointly in one anti-apartheid movement. I mean, the structures can wait. The more important thing is that we are jointly in one anti-apartheid movement.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you both very much for this incredible conversation. If you don't mind, I have a question of my own. I think increasingly it seems that Palestinian anger and condemnation are being directed at the Palestinian Authority almost as much as at the occupation Many believe that the PA is structurally unable to defend and uphold the rights of Palestinian and the interests of Palestinian people. Dr. Barghouti, you're of course yourself a critic of the PA, but what is your response to those who claim that the Palestinian Authority is irreformable and is in itself a part of the settler colonial structure and an obstacle to Palestinian liberation? Of course, it would be great to hear both of you on this issue.
Well, I would not say that the Palestinian Authority is part of the colonial structure. I think that is a bit of going too far. But I would say that in its existing nature today, it is becoming an obstacle because mainly because of this one specific thing they are doing, which is what they call security coordination with Israel. I think this is the first time, I don't know, maybe Ilan is more experienced than me in that field, but I don't know of any other example where people who are under occupation are supposed to provide protection to their occupiers while they are unable to protect their own people from these occupiers. And the Palestinian Authority is really not an authority. It's an authority under occupation. It cannot defend anybody. I mean, it cannot defend even the Area A, which is supposed to be under its own control according to Oslo Agreement. So it is really a very big problem. And I believe that we had a crisis, but this crisis now is much more prominent since the very specific decision of the Palestinian Authority to cancel elections. You know that we had meetings between different political parties, the 14 parties, and we agreed upon a very important platform, including the creation of a unified leadership of the Palestinian Popular Resistance, but also to conduct presidential elections, legislative council elections, and elections for the Palestinian National Council. After we agreed on all of that and the date was established for legislative council elections, they simply canceled them. And that, in my opinion, has created the worst crisis internally today in Palestine, because you are talking about a structure with no separation of powers. The whole authority power is concentrated in the hands of a small number of people, and we cannot get out of this crisis except if three conditions are met. First, and I don't want to repeat, but what I said before, which is the adoption of a program of struggle alternative to Oslo. Second, to accept participatory democracy, which means a participation in the leadership, that there is no monopoly over the authority, whether in the West Bank or Gaza. And third, that elections will take place. People have the right to choose their leaders, and we have to find the ways of giving this right to the Palestinian people.
Ilan, would you like to reflect on the question as well?
Just shortly, I think we are in a situation where there are actually three political structures which allow Palestinians to, at least theoretically, to represent themselves in historical Palestine. Palestinians who are representatives of the community inside Israel in the Israeli parliament, Palestinians who are represented by the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and through the PA structure. Now, all these three methods of representation, I think, are connected to the status quo. I don't believe that if you dismantle these three, if you want, structures, you necessarily change the status quo. You might make it even worse. So I think that this needs to be part of Palestinians, surely, dialogue of an alternative vision. And one has to offer alternatives before one dismantles existing structures of representation. And everybody who lives through these structures knows how delicate the questions are. I mean, on the one hand, they are a voice. They allow you to have a voice. On the other hand, this voice is totally censored by the powers that be, which is Israel, from the river to the sea. So I think this is this cannot be separated from a discussion of the struggle forward and the end game of the struggle, to which Mustafa already, I think, alluded in his previous answers.
Thank you. I'll offer another question, and this one is coming to us from Shabina Kute, who says, "Sirs, when we talk about organizing any resistance to neo-imperial and neo-colonial apparatuses the world over, how can a unified solidarity be achieved so as to register success in our efforts? Recently in India, we witnessed one of the greatest wins a public-led forum achieved in case of the repealing of the farmers' laws. But that was a very localized struggle, even though the support to Indian farmers came from all over the globe. When marginalized people are disintegrated around the globe with very specific agendas and issues, how can global solidarity forums be established for each of such marginalized and subaltern sections, hoping that the power of public can offer massive resistance to tyrannies world over, wherever they are? Thank you very much."
I don't claim that I have the answer, the full answer to this question, but I can propose two things actually. One is the power of ideas. I believe that everything starts with the right idea, and there is nothing more powerful than an idea which is a timely idea. And in my opinion, the solidarity with Palestinians in particular, and the issue of decolonization and ending this injustice that we live in this world, is a very powerful and very timely idea today. I mean, look, I don't want to deviate the discussion. Look at what's happening with the issue of COVID-19. Is there anything more clear about how unjust this world that we live in is? I mean, the fact that there is so much discrimination, the disparity in this distribution of wealth. So I think everything starts with the right idea. And I think the power of ideas is very strong in creating a unified solidarity movement. And that's what we should start with. Second thing is organization. It's very important. It's not enough to have the right idea. The head has to have legs to walk on. And that's where organization becomes very important. So organizing the solidarity groups and unifying this organization is very important for any future work.
Nothing to add to this. We can move to the next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Rula Ode on Zoom. And she asks, equality, justice, freedom, can these be used in attracting support from governments in the West and elsewhere when they themselves don't practice these themselves? So is civil society in these countries the key rather than government?
I believe so. I believe that civil society is very important, and in organizing solidarity with Palestinians, we know the limitations of governments, and we know how careful they are in approaching these questions. And as a Palestinian, I am constantly learning from what happened in South Africa. I went there 3 times, and I tried to, and I believe that the Palestinian issue is going through the same process. The South African anti-apartheid movement first affected the civil society, the parties, the parliaments, the individuals. Then they created a certain amount of pressure that forced parliaments to start taking proper decisions, and eventually the governments changed. And the last to change, of course, was the United States government. So in my opinion, the role of civil society is very crucial here. It's very important and very crucial. And I do agree that that's the point where we should concentrate our efforts.
If I may add, I do agree, and I think that we should all watch to see whether civil society, in the case of Palestine, can play the transformative role that we hope it should play. Because if you look at the way the Israeli lobby, and before that the pro-Zionist lobby worked from its very beginning, from its very inception, they believe, and they still believe, I think, that they were right, that there's no need to invest too much in civil society. All you have to do is to invest in political elites, economic elites, and military elites. And it doesn't really matter if the civil society is against you, as long as the governments are with you. I mean, Israel is the ultimate manifestation of that kind of an attitude. Who cares if the vast majority of people in the West are probably pro-Palestinians? Who cares if the vast majority of people who live in the Arab world or in the Muslim world are pro-Palestinians? As long as the regimes, democratic or not, it doesn't matter, support Israel for whatever reasons and motives, Israel's position in the world is safe. If this is going to be a successful historical project, it's bad news for all of us in every walk of life. And Mustafa mentioned COVID-19, but it would be true about ecological disasters, social injustice, and so on. Israel is trying to prove that you don't need civil society in order to succeed in maintaining colonization, ethnic cleansing, and so on. I think what the Palestinian struggle and those who support it are trying to prove, that you do need the civil society, and civil society matters when it comes to issues that really relate to their welfare, their existence, their dignity, and so on. In this respect, Palestine epitomizes, I think, something which is much bigger than justice for the Palestinians. It is really the way we treat and conceive and perceive the power of political elites and social elites and economic elites in our lives. Israel has very carefully studied these structures of power, exploited very well, one should say. Hopefully we will show that there are other dimensions of human activity and morality that are important. And I think Palestine would be a very important test for that kind of moral question.
Thank you both. We have time for probably just a couple more questions. So I'm going to ask a question by Katie Chexfield, who asks, how important do you think Palestinian narratives of resistance are for promoting decolonial solidarity? And how can these contribute to future justice in Palestine?
Well, as I understand the question, yes, the response is narrative is very important. Actually, one of the main aspects of our struggle is a struggle about narratives. And what we constantly face is the domination of Israeli establishment narrative in many circles in the world. And I think the most important method we used, at least one of the most effective methods we used, was to bring people in and let them see reality by their own eyes. Visiting Hebron is enough for you to understand what apartheid means. And unfortunately, with COVID-19, we have had very big decline in the number of people who can come and visit the country. But I believe that bringing out the right narrative and bringing it in the right form is very important. We live today in the world of social media, which can be a positive and a negative thing at the same time. It's very positive because it allows us to use these instruments, as a couple of young people in Sheikh Jarrah did in a beautiful way. It allows us to use them and get over the fact that mainstream media outlets prevent Palestinian narrative from getting out to people. But at the same time, social media requires certain skills and requires short messages and requires a modern approach. And all of these things are challenges that we are faced. But I do absolutely agree that the entry point is to convince people with the actual objective, real narrative about the situation here.
If I may add, and I totally agree, I think in this respect, the struggle against the Nakba denial is a very important part of this question. Not only because there is still a wide denial of the ethnic cleansing that happened in 1948 and the crime against humanity that Israel perpetrated in 48, but because that crime has not ended. And as the Palestinians call it, the al-Nakba al-Mustamirra, the ongoing Nakba, is it means that the same ideology that was behind the ethnic cleansing of 1948, which was not recognized by the world, is the same ideology behind the ethnic cleansing of Sheikh Jarrah or the Nakab of Halil Hebron today. And I think this kind of narrative is not as a political position, but as a historical truth that has to be taught in schools, in universities, and has to be accepted by the mainstream media in the West, is a very important part of the struggle. I remember, Mustafa, your indignation and anger, which I shared when Britain celebrated the centenary for the Balfour Declaration in 2017, without any reference to the fact that that recognition was the first step towards the crime against humanity that was perpetrated against the Palestinians in 1948. So I think these narratives are very important, especially at the time when Israel weaponizes the denial of the Holocaust as a weapon to stifle and suppress criticism on it and support for the Palestinians. We should build an international alliance against the Nakba denial as soon as possible, I think, because this can change the whole perspective of how people would understand not just what Israel did, but why the Palestinians resist to this very day.
I agree with you. And if I may add, since we should have talked about this before also, I believe that it is very important to remember that Oslo process, in a way, convinced many Palestinians at the time, and maybe the whole world accepted it, is to present the Palestinian history and the struggle between Palestine and Zionist movement as if it started in 1967, and to ignore what happened before, including the ethnic cleansing in 48. For Palestinians, this was like a compromise. I mean that, okay, we forget about what happened then, and with the condition that there will be a free Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza. But in reality, I think maybe this would have worked, I don't know. I mean, but it did not work. And it did not work mainly because I think of the greed of the Zionist movement, and which wants all of Palestine and does not want even that compromise, that historical compromise. And by their greed, and by killing the process of Oslo and by destroying that agreement, practically they brought us back to the roots of the issue, which is not only 1948, but the whole initiation of the Zionist movement in the end of the 19th century. And that's why I agree, and I say that we should not accept denial of what happened in 48. And also the closure, you asked about the closure before, the closure would not happen without accepting the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Because that's what ending apartheid means. Ending apartheid means that I have the right to be in Palestine like any other person. And that Palestinian refugees should not be denied the right to be in their own country.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one final question, which I think is the simplest, but at the same time, perhaps the most profound of the ones we've had so far. And it's for both of you. And Gary Haynes from Zoom asks you, are you hopeful?
I am absolutely hopeful. Yes. And it's not just optimism. It's about reality and about understanding what's happening, not only here, but also what's happening in the world. I was so encouraged by the new movements that are happening now in Sudan and in Tunisia about this rejection of authoritarianism, this rejection of dictatorship. And also, I am so impressed by what's happening among Palestinian people today. And I'm so also impressed by friends like Ilan and others who are struggling with us for justice and struggling for the right idea. And that gives me a lot of hope. And what also gives me a lot of hope is how the young Palestinian generation are reacting to the situation. Even those who have not been born here, those who were born to families that that were forced out of their country, but their commitment to Palestine is so impressive. And that's why I'm so hopeful, and I think we are on the right way. And one day we will achieve what we want, and Palestine will be free from oppression, from discrimination, from racism, and from apartheid.
I can only echo this. I'm hopeful too. I don't think you can be involved deeply in either the solidarity movement with the Palestinians or being part of the liberation struggle without hope. Otherwise, it becomes an inertia, and you tend to forget what you are fighting for. Evil system, rogue states, apartheid systems in history eventually were brought down. Sometimes it takes a longer period. Sometimes it is bloodier than in other cases. But these kinds of systems which have no moral basis cannot be sustained for long. Of course, the problem is that you don't know how long the struggle will take, and you don't know exactly when it will happen. But I do think you are entitled, without being considered an hallucinator, to believe that because you are on the right side of history, and when it comes to the truth, the Palestinians have nothing to lose, that eventually there is hope for Palestine. Because as I stated, if there's no hope for Palestine, there's no hope for social justice, ecological justice, medical justice, and political justice in the world at large.
So well said.
Amazing. Thank you both for this incredible engagement and the powerful and beautiful words and what you've charged us with doing. Yeah, it's been just amazing. So I would love everyone to join me in thanking Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, Professor Ilan Pappé. Thank you all for joining us from across the globe. It's been incredible to see where everyone's coming in from here on Zoom. And also we've had people with us on YouTube, as I said. There will be a recording of this conversation. Usually it takes about 24 hours to buffer and process and post to YouTube, but that will be on the IAS YouTube channel very shortly, as well as the EDN YouTube channel. That's all we have for today, and that was a lot. Again, thank you for your generosity, your wisdom, and your kindness. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.